So, good evening. Welcome to everybody out there in live stream land, and hope you're doing well tonight. I am excited about what we are going to study. We are going to take a look at Esther as we continue our series of incredible women of the Bible. So, really looking forward to jumping into that. Don't really have a lot of stuff before we do that, so we'll just jump in. If you are on Facebook, you can drop something into the comment boxes. I will try to monitor that. Also, if you are on the website, there is a chat box on the website, and I am monitoring that as well. Kind of difficult for me to monitor all of those chat boxes at once, but I try to get it done. I'm just not really good with it. But I know some of you are listening. Sometimes regular Wednesday night services haven't started back where you are. We haven't started back either. We are still continuing to do Wednesday night by live stream. So I guess for the foreseeable future, we will continue to do that. I don't see that changing in the next couple of weeks anyway. So if you don't have a place to be on Wednesday night, we would love it if you would just join us. We are doing this study on incredible women of the Bible that will go through. I believe it goes through the end of October. I'd have to check that to make sure, but I should know that, right? I'm teaching class, but I think it's through the end of October. There are several ladies we're going to talk about in that. But if you don't have a place to go on a Wednesday night, please tune in here. If you do have a place to go, we wish you well going that, and some of you will be starting back soon, I think. So we are going to jump into incredible women of the Bible and talk about Esther. So as we go into the book of Esther, I just want to kind of put the key players. Okay, here are the key players in the book of Esther. Ahasuerus, who is the king of Persia. If you are looking in history books, you're trying to find him. He will be Xerxes. So he is called Xerxes in some other material. So Xerxes reigned. Man, I'm kind of going off the top of my head here, and I do not remember all of this stuff. I should have looked it up. But Xerxes may be 486 to 465, somewhere in there. So this, the things that happen in the book of Esther are probably, I think, probably around 480 BC. They happen in Susa. Let me see if I can show you a map quickly. Move to the other side of the screen. In fact, let me just move completely off of the screen. Susa, if you can see my cursor, is way over here on the right of the screen. So Susa is right there. Jerusalem is over here. That's roughly 750 miles as the crow flies, roughly, just to let you know what's happening. So Esther takes place over here in Susa, which is functioning as the capital of the Persian Empire. Babylon is over here. Just kind of give you an idea of where it is on a map to let you know what's going on. So Ahasuerus, who is what's going on with my screen down here at the bottom? Ahasuerus, who is the king of Persia. Esther, who is one of the main characters, obviously. Mordecai, who is Esther's uncle, who is actually raising her. I believe that's right. It is, yes, I'm pretty sure that Mordecai is an uncle. And then Haman, who ends up being kind of the villain of the story. He is the one who is intent on killing all of the Jews as the story goes through in the book of Esther. If you have ever heard of the Jewish Feast of Purim, the Jewish Feast of Purim is centered around the book of Esther and the salvation, the deliverance of the Jews. You read about that at the end of the book. We won't spend a lot of time there. The word Purim is actually the Persian word that means lots, because Haman was casting lots to see which day he would do these horrible things. So Purim is the word for lots, and so Purim is the Jewish feast that celebrates what happens in the book of Esther. I want to try just quickly to get this white thing off the bottom of my screen, but I don't know that I can do that. Maybe it's right here. All right, so yeah, that helps out. That was bothering me. All right, so those kind of the key players in the book. So we're just going to kind of jump in and look at some lessons that we can just kind of pull out of the book of Esther without trying to read the entire book. I mean, obviously, we don't want to sit here and read the entire book while we're online. So we're just going to kind of jump in and look at some of the things that happened. So here's some of the background. Ahasuerus, who is the king of Persia. I mean, the first part of the book, we know Queen Vashti and all the things that happened with that. I don't want to go into that. You read the book later. So Esther becomes queen. She is being raised by Mordecai, and so she's chosen as queen. She's obviously from the text an extremely beautiful lady, and as she becomes in the first part of the book, what happens is Mordecai discovers this plot to kill the king. So he relates that to the king, and he tells it to Esther. Esther tells it to the king in the name of Mordecai, and it's investigated. And the two men who were plotting to kill the king they're hung, and they're killed, obviously. So Haman then enters the story, and Haman is a man who's going up through the ranks of the king's attendants, and he is being given more and more power, and he's becoming more and more famous, and he's being given more and more responsibility. And as Haman would come through the king's gate, everybody would bow down to Haman because he was a very important person, except Mordecai. Mordecai would not bow down before Haman. And I'm sorry, I'm kind of watching these comments. Throw your comments in there if you have questions. So Haman becomes, he just becomes furious with Mordecai, and he decides that he wants to destroy not only Mordecai, but he decides that he will destroy all of the Jewish nation. So the first month, it's the month of Nisan. It's the 12th year of the king Ahasuerus. They cast pur, which are lots, and they cast it for the month after month to the 12th month to the month of Adar. And so Haman goes to the king on the appointed day when the lots are cast, and he says, there is a people scattered among the peoples in your kingdom, and their laws are different than anybody else's laws, and they don't keep the king's laws. It's not to the king's profit to tolerate them. I'll pay 10,000 talents of silver in those in charge of the king's business if they will you would just allow us to destroy the Jewish people. So the king takes off his signet ring. He gives it to Haman and says, the money's given to you. The people do whatever seems good to you. So the scribes are summoned. They write out the edict, the order, and they send it out through all of the provinces that on a particular day, then the Jewish people will be destroyed. And so when Mordecai, who is sitting at the king's gate, when he hears this, he tears his clothes. He puts on sackcloth and ashes. We read that so much in the Old Testament, right? And I've never torn my clothes and sat in sackcloth and ashes. Maybe I should, but just a sign of deep humility. It's a sign that something is wrong. So he goes to the entrance of the king's gate, because you can't go into the king's gate if you have on sackcloth. So he goes to the entrance of the gate, and he's got great mourning. He's fasting. He's weeping, and there are others who are there. So Esther, now that she's queen, she has young women and eunuchs and who take care of her needs, and they come and tell her what's happening to Mordecai. and he goes, and Esther tells him to go out to Mordecai and learn what has happened. So Mordecai gives him the decree, tells him what is happening, tells him what is going on, and then he relates that back to Esther. So we get to this part of the story. I needed to get you there so we could talk about what is happening in the story and what happens with Esther when we get there. So there are a couple of rules that are going on in the kingdom, okay? When Mordecai learns all of this and he cries out and he goes to the entrance of the king's gate, Esther sends out garments, to put on some clothes and take off your sackcloth, but Mordecai wouldn't accept those. And so Esther calls Hathach, who's one of the king's eunuchs, who's been appointed to attend to her, and she ordered him to go to Mordecai and find out what was going on. So he goes out to Mordecai, and Mordecai tells him everything that happens. He tells him the amount of money that Haman has promised to pay into the king's treasury. He gives him a copy of the decree that's issued in Susa for the destruction of the Jews. And he sends all of that to Esther so that she will understand what's going on. So Hathach goes to Esther and tells her what Mordecai has said. And I want to pick up there in Esther, I think it's chapter 4, verse 10. So if you got a Bible, just if you don't have one, you can look on the screen. I'm going to pull it up here where you can see it. Get the right button here. So Esther spoke to Hathach and commanded him to go to Mordecai and say, all the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court without being called, there is but one law, to be put to death, except the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter so that he may live. But as for me, I have not been called to come into the king these 30 days. So what I want you to understand at this part of the story is that Mordecai is asking Esther to go talk to the king, but Esther knows if you go to the king and the king hasn't summoned you, if he doesn't extend the golden scepter and you go into his presence, that you will die. So what Mordecai is actually asking Esther to do is life-threatening. And that is why that this first lesson, Esther is an incredible woman of courage. To be able to know that Mordecai is asking her to do something that is so serious, and she is going to be willing to do that. I know when you first read this, there's this apprehension that she has. And we would experience that too, wouldn't we? I mean, aren't there times that God calls us to do something, and even though we know it's the right thing to do, even we know it's the godly thing to do, and there's not really any question in our mind, it's the thing that God wants us to do, sometimes we can have apprehension about that. We just have this little nagging doubt in the back of our minds, wondering, is this the thing that I really need to do? And Esther is there, but she has this incredible courage that she is going to go and work and do the things that she needs to do. That kind of leads me to my second point. So Esther sought God's will through prayer and fasting. Let's go back to the text in verse 12, right here. And they told Mordecai what Esther had said, and Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. Now, the other part of this story, right, is Esther has kept it secret that she is Jewish. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this. And that's we quote that verse a lot, right? Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, go gather all the Jews to be found in Susa and hold a fast on my behalf. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, not for 3 days, night or day. I and my young women will also fast as you do. Then I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. And Mordecai then went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him. You know, there's some really great lessons just in Esther chapter 4 and about how she approaches this situation. So the thing I want you to think about right now is that Esther sought God's will through prayer and fasting. You know, she didn't say, okay, I'll wait 3 days and I'll go in and see if the king extends the golden scepter to me. She didn't kind of just sit around and wonder. For 3 days, she asked every Jewish person to fast and to pray. And there's a great lesson in that. I don't know if you have ever dedicated a difficulty or a problem to prayer and fasting. I don't know if you've ever set aside, and it's not something that one would do all the time. It's not something that it might be very special occasions like this. I mean, this is a very serious occasion, but she dedicated not only herself but others to prayer and fasting. Now, I don't know if if you fast much. I am not an expert at fasting. I can promise you that. But if you do decide to fast, I mean, make sure you take some health concerns, talk to a doctor possibly, or do shorter fast. 3 days, that's a pretty long fast. So the next lesson is Esther needed others to support her. Now, I think it's interesting. She didn't jump out and do this all by herself. She didn't say, well, I will pray and fast for 3 days. I mean, she is, but she didn't say, I'll do it by myself, or I'm the only one that would do it. She didn't keep it to herself. She sent this problem, she sent that out to all of the Jewish people. She asked other people to be involved in the prayer and the fasting for that, so that God would provide to her an opportunity to rescue the people. And I think it's really interesting that Mordecai says, look, if you keep quiet, God will rescue, but you and your house will perish. He's also kind of in her father's house being an uncle, but it's just interesting that she asked other people to support her. So if you're going through a difficulty and you're spending time in prayer and you're praying for a particular situation, don't do that by yourself. I mean, ask other people to help. I know sometimes, when you come to churches and you read church bulletins and you hear a prayer request, that is that prayer and fasting. Prayer is the most important thing you can do. So if you have a concern, if you have a difficulty, if you have a sickness, if you have a problem in your family, if you have one of your children have difficulty, or your parents have difficulty, or a friend, a coworker, I mean, don't violate confidence that someone has placed in you. But if you can, ask other people to pray with you, whether if it's a small group of people, and sometimes we have that, right? Like Jesus had Peter, James, and John. I mean, Peter, James, and John were kind of like this inner circle among the 12. And it's okay to have like an inner circle like that, people that you really trust, people that you can go to with things that you just really can't tell other people. Then sometimes you can, maybe if it's not such of a confidential nature, you can share that with other people. But remember this part of the story. Esther needed other people to support her, and she asked for that help, and don't be ashamed to ask for that help. And the next thing is she took a risk, right? She didn't just choose the safe route. I mean, it looks like she started that way, doesn't she? Well, you can't really go into the king unless he asks. And then Mordecai says, yes, but you need to do this. And maybe she had to have a little push to take a risk, but she did take a risk. I mean, you remember that part of the verse? Let me get on the other side of the screen down here. Then I will go to the king, though it is against the law, And if I perish, I perish. If I'm destroyed, I'll just be destroyed. If I die, I die. However you would like to translate that section. But this is the thing. Esther took a risk. She understood the problem, she understood the difficulty. She appealed to God through prayer and fasting, and not only prayer, her own prayer, but the prayer of other people and the fasting of other people. And then she said, okay, when we do those things, then we're willing to take a risk. I'll go before the king, and if I perish, I perish. I mean, she's trusted the process. You know, sometimes you hear things, and whether it's business or you're learning a skill, and one of the things people say a lot of times is trust the process. And Esther here is trusting the process. And the process is taking it to God with prayer and fasting, have other people joining in on that, and then you're willing to take a risk. So Esther took a risk. She didn't choose the safe route. And sometimes that's exactly what God calls us to do, right? Sometimes we need to take the risk. Sometimes we need to trust God. Always we need to trust God. Let God lead. Let God guide. And when you know, I mean, you're just that it's God moving in God's hand, then you take a risk and you follow that path. So the next thing about Esther, I think Esther overcame her fear by trusting God. You know, I don't doubt, and this is not in the text, it's just me thinking. I don't doubt that when she went before the king, not being summoned, that she probably had apprehension. She probably wondered as she took that journey, that walk to go before the king. She might have thought, I mean, is this the last time I'll walk down this hallway? Is this the day that I'll be put to death? I want to, you know, there's this chance that I'm going to break this law. But even though she had that fear and probably that apprehension, I think she overcame that by trusting God. I think it was probably instilled in her through Mordecai. You know, Mordecai raised her, and Mordecai evidently was a great person of faith, because remember what he says, if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. Mordecai was convinced that God was going to intervene. And I think probably maybe Esther, but because of the example of Mordecai, because of her upbringing, because she had seen faith in action in Mordecai. You know, Mordecai wouldn't bow before Haman. That had to do with his faith in God. I think Esther, seeing that modeled, she was able to overcome her fear by trusting God. And that is kind of an aside point. But how do you have an opportunity to influence someone else, or to mentor someone else, or to help lead someone else, or to affect somebody else in such a way that when they run into a situation in life where there is a crisis, that because they have seen you model faith and they've seen you model trust in God, they're also able to model trust in God. It may be a spouse or a parent or a friend, a child, model faith in God, so that when other people run into difficulties in life, they can reflect the faith that you have and see that as an example, and they can trust in God when these times of crisis comes. And the next thing is Esther took advantage of the opportunity placed before her. I mean, really, do you think it was by mistake or by coincidence that Esther's queen? I mean, Esther is the only book in the Bible, right, where the name God is not mentioned. I know you know that. If you ever find it on Trivia Question, you'll know. But do you think that it was just a coincidence that Esther had become queen? Do you think it was a coincidence that she was picked of all of the ladies who could have been queen? I don't think so at all. I think one thing that you see in the book of Esther is this providence of God, even though it's not mentioned, even though it never says, oh, God made this happen. And a lot of times that's exactly what our life is like. we know God is moving and working, and we can look at situations in our life, and I can situations where God has exercised His providence in my life, where He has moved circumstances and times and other things to direct me to go down a certain path. So Esther knows there's an opportunity, and it's placed before her, and she takes advantage of that opportunity. When she says, okay, look, you can't go into the king unless you're summoned, and Mordecai says, well, you need to do this anyway, and the prayer and the fasting, and she said, okay, if I perish, I perish. She knew the opportunity, and she took advantage of that opportunity, and she put herself into a position where God would use her to deliver the Jewish people. And I think this is the next thing that Esther knew, and that is God's always at work. I mean, again, even though God is not mentioned in the text, you can't read through the book of Esther and not see the way God is using providence and the way God is working in the lives and in the actions of all the things that are happening. Just quickly, understanding that God is always working. We'll probably address this again. I think I have this on another slide, but I mean, do you think it's not coincidence that Esther's queen? Later in the book, Haman has this plan where he is going to destroy the Jews, and he's got it worked out. I mean, he's got his plan already laid out. And Esther goes into the king. Just the rest of the story. Esther goes into the king. The king, when he sees Esther standing in the court, she's favorable in his sight. And he extends the golden scepter that's in her hand. And so Esther comes in, and he asks, okay, Esther, what's your request? And I mean, it'll be given to you up to half of my kingdom. And Esther said, well, if it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come to a feast that I've prepared for the king. I mean, she doesn't come right out and say, okay, I want you to intervene in this plan. She asked Haman and the king to come to a feast. So they come to the feast, and they're doing the stuff that you do at a feast, eating and drinking. And he says, what's your wish? I mean, what's your request? Even half of the kingdom. And she said, well, my request is that if I found favor in your sight, then come to a feast that I'm going to prepare tomorrow, you and Haman. And the king says, okay, if that's your request, that's what I'll do. So Haman goes home that night, and I mean, he's excited. He doesn't know that Esther is Jewish, right? He's been called to a feast that only he and the king get to go to. I mean, he feels like he's really something else. He goes home. I mean, he is so happy. He goes home. He can't wait to tell everybody what happened to him that day at work, right? I mean, you ever had a day like that? But he sees Mordecai, and Mordecai, he didn't rise, he didn't tremble. And again, Haman is just furious with Mordecai. So, but he restrains himself. He goes home. He tells them all the great things that have happened. He even brought his friends and his wife, Zeresh was her name, and he brought them in, told them all the great things that had happened that day, and how the king had honored him, and he's been invited to this feast, and Queen Esther is not going to let anybody come except me and the king. I mean, you can just see how he's just laying it out there, right? But that's worth nothing to me, because I just see Mordecai, and he doesn't bow down. And his wife and all his friends say, well, you know what? Make a gallows, build it 50 cubits high, so that's about 150 feet. And in the morning, when you go see the king, just have Mordecai hang. Just take care of it. And Haman was like, you know what? That's good. So he had the gallows made overnight. I mean, he's got to be a man of great power and can command a lot of people to do things, right? Now, here's the interesting thing. Esther understands God's always at work. And this is what's happening in the story. That very night, King Ahasuerus couldn't sleep. So he asked the book of memorable deeds to be brought and read to him that night. And they're read to the king, and guess what is read? What is read is Mordecai. It was written how Mordecai told about Bithana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who had guarded the threshold and sought to lay hands on him and kill him. And the king said, well, what did we do for, this is the Greg Smith paraphrase, what did we do for Mordecai? And they said, well, we didn't do anything for him. And he said, well, who's out there in the court? And they said, well, Haman's out there in the court. And he said, well, send Haman in. And he says to Haman, hey, what should be done for the person who the king delights to honor? Now, Haman is out there because he wants to ask the king to hang Mordecai. Okay, remember that. So here's my point before I get too far. Do you think it was coincidence that the king could not sleep that night, asked the book of memorable deeds be read to him, and what was read to him was about Mordecai? Do you think that was by coincidence? Because that's not. That is not coincidence. That is God always at work behind the scenes. So anyway, the rest of the story really quickly, as Paul Harvey would say. So Haman thinks, oh, wow, the wants to honor me, so I need to come up with something really good, right? So he says, well, bring some robes that the king has worn and a horse that the king has ridden, and let the robes and the horse be handed over to one of the most noble officials. And let them dress him in those robes and put him on the horse and lead him through the city proclaiming, thus shall be done to the king, to the man that the king delights to honor. So, I mean, if I could just see Haman's face, because the king says, okay, take the robes and the horse, and you go to Mordecai, the Jew, who sits at the gate, him, and Haman by that point has just got to be steaming. And he says, don't you leave anything out that you mentioned. So Haman leads the horse through the city with Mordecai on the back, shouting, thus it shall be done for the man the king delights to honor. And he is just, he does that, and he goes home, his head is covered. He's like, you're not going to believe what happened. Yesterday was a great day at work. Today's not such a good day, right? And they say, look, if it's before Mordecai that you begin to fall, and the Jewish people, you'll not overcome him. So then he has to hurry and get to the feast, because remember, Esther has asked him to come to a feast with the king. And during that feast, she says, if I've found favor, king, let my life be spared, and my people, because we've been sold to be destroyed and killed and to be annihilated. And if we'd just been sold as slaves, I would have been quiet, because our affliction wouldn't be anything to bring before the king. And so the king says, who is it who has plotted to do this? And Esther said, a foe and an enemy, this wicked Haman. So Haman's terrified, and the king is angry, so he goes out. Haman goes into where Esther is, and he's begging for his life. The king comes back into the room, thinks that he is assaulting Esther in the king's palace, and he wants him destroyed. And one of the king's eunuchs says, well, Haman built a gallows for Mordecai. And the king said, well, you take him and you hang him on that gallows. And so the Jewish people were saved. I know you've read Esther before, but that's just kind of the story. Jeff Goldtrap, hey, evil is always planning and plotting. Evil is not coincidental as well. Hey, great point, Jeff. Thank you very much. That's why you put stuff in the chat box, right? Because you have comments that I don't ever think of. But yes, God is obviously much greater than Satan. Okay, they are not equal. Satan's a created being, but you have to remember that he is always plotting and trying to destroy your life as much as God is trying to save it. So what kind of lessons can we learn from Esther? What can you take home, as they say? Number one, God will put us in the right place at the right time to serve him and to accomplish his will. God will put us in the right circumstance if we will listen to him and allow him to guide and to lead us. There are times in my life that I know that God worked circumstances for me to be in a particular place at a particular time. And God, if you will listen to God, if you will follow his lead, if you will seek him, he will put you in the right place to serve him at the right time to accomplish his will. And it may not be a place that that you really plan to be, or it might not fit your plan, but you have to be open and let God work his plan. So that's the first lesson, is God will put us in the right place. The second is God's plan will be accomplished. Even if we don't participate, God's plan will be accomplished. But God's at work in the lives of people. Hey, Courtney, that's a great comment. Courtney says, how often we hang on our own gallows. That is a great, see, again, that's why you put stuff in the chat box, right? Yeah, how often have we done that? God's will can be accomplished even if we don't participate. I mean, God is at work in the lives of people. I mean, even those who don't know him or know what's happening, I assure us, God's working in his life. God, the reading of the book on the night that he can't sleep, the picking Esther to be queen. I mean, God's working, and he doesn't even know that God is working in his life. And God continues to do that, not only to us who are seeking that, but even to people who are not seeking that. God is always at work, and God will accomplish his will. God's plan, I mean, it's seen so well in the church. I mean, before creation began, God knew about the establishment of the church. When you get to the book of Daniel, and God, predicts the kingdoms who are coming and the kingdom of Christ and how all of that fits together. So God is always working. He says to the king of Babylon, to Nebuchadnezzar, I raised you up for this purpose. Or to Cyrus, I raised you up for this purpose. So even people who aren't necessarily even believers in God, God still works his plan, and his plan will be accomplished. So I think our prayer, at least my prayer, is to step back and say, okay, God, what is your plan? What is the thing that you're trying to accomplish, and how do I fit within that plan? Don't let me make my own plan or go out and do my own thing, but how do I fit within the plan and the things that you're trying to accomplish? The third one is we cooperate with God to accomplish his work. Now, it's not that he can't do it without us, okay? It's not like he has to have us, but that's our purpose in life. I mean, your purpose in life is to cooperate with God to do. I mean, isn't it great when Jesus is teaching the disciples to pray, and he says, "Let your will be done on earth as it is in heaven." I mean, that is the purpose of man, to follow God's will, to be one that God works through to accomplish his will on the earth exactly like it is accomplished in heaven. So when we cooperate with God, part of that prayer is God, whatever needs to be done to accomplish your purpose and your will and your desire, that is what I want to be. I want to be someone that you work through to accomplish the things on this earth that you need to accomplish. So then we kind of open our life up, and we let God lead. I mean, I know sometimes that gets complicated, doesn't it? Because you might be looking at choices and saying, okay, which choice should I pick? Is God trying to move me into a certain direction? And sometimes that may not be crystal clear. And have prayer, fasting, have godly people that you trust, that you can ask questions of, people that you will listen to their spiritual advice as you try to seek out how do you work in life in a way that accomplishes God's will. But just wake up every morning and just say, God, what do you need me to do today to accomplish what you need accomplished on this earth? And God, in my life, may your will always been done. All right, so it's another great comment. Courtney, hope it's okay. I tell people at CHU, what if God hasn't answered your prayer yet because he's answering one you haven't asked, or answering one someone else has asked on your behalf? He is always at work, always. And that is a great thing to chew on. I mean, have you ever done that? I mean, you pray, and you pray, and you pray for something, and this is exactly what God wants me to do, but it's not. It's not. And you pray and you wonder, okay, God, why aren't you answering this prayer? And then later, there's that country song, right? Thank God for unanswered prayers. And we probably all have those in our lives where we have prayed for one particular thing because we thought that was exactly the thing that we needed, but it wasn't. It wasn't. And thankfully, God, answered the prayer in a different way. And I love that thing that Courtney said. Sometimes people may be praying a different prayer for you. I mean, someone else might see an opportunity that you have of really great things that you can do. And the idea of that, just the possibility of that isn't opened up to you yet. But somebody else sees it. So they're praying to God on your behalf. And I think even about Esther and Mordecai here. I mean, Mordecai understood maybe more than Esther at that moment how God had opened up an opportunity for her that she just didn't see yet. But we cooperate with God to accomplish His will. And this is the last one. Last lesson. I'll get out a little early tonight, maybe. Your life is not a meaningless series of events. And maybe sometimes we feel like that. We feel like life is just, it just happened, right? It's just this endless, meaningless series of events that are tied together, and it just happens. And we might not see, even in our own lives, the pattern, even that we see in this story of Esther, that God is always behind the scenes and directing and shaping and moving and making happen. And we're scratching our heads thinking, okay, God, what in the world are you doing? Have you ever had those moments where, you go through this period of life and you're scratching your head thinking, okay, what are you doing, God? What are you doing? And then there's that moment, maybe a month later or a year later or 10 years later, where all of a sudden the light bulb comes on and it all fits together and you say, okay, God, now I understand what you were doing. So we kind of see this lower story, S-T-O-R-Y, right, that we're a part of, because this is the story that we're in, and we're seeing this lower part, all of these happenings that are going on day after day. And some of it seems monotonous. We get up and we do the same thing day after day, and we go to the same job, we talk to the same people, and we do the same thing, and we see it from this vantage point. And then there's this upper story where God has us in this huge story that belongs to Him, and we can't see that. We can only see this part that we're in this lower part, and someday, and there are times that all of a sudden we understand what God is doing. Ephesians chapter 2. For you are saved by grace through faith. It's not of yourselves, it's the gift of God, not by works, so that no one would boast. All right, we get all of that, and we really center on that. Okay, it's not by works, so that no one boasts. But then he says, for we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works which God prepared in advance for us to do. In advance for us to do. So we are God's workmanship. We are the thing that God has made, and to do good works. And no, good works don't save us, but God has this great life plan for us. It's like a present. If you get up on Christmas morning, you get ready to open a present. You say, okay, God has a present for us. It's salvation through Jesus. And that's true. But God has another kind of present for us. It's the present that we are living in. And the present, the right now, can be great if we understand that God is always at work, and just look into our lives of how God can work through us. So Esther, God made sure that Esther was in the perfect place at the perfect time for the good work that He had prepared for her. It's Mordecai. Remember what he says, perhaps you were made queen for just a time as this. And we would look at that story and what Mordecai said, and we would say, yes, that's exactly right, Mordecai. So here's the question God has done, the statement, then the question. Okay, the statement is God has done the same thing for you, and He's done the same thing for me. He has put us in positions that maybe we can influence someone, maybe we can talk to someone, maybe there's an opportunity that we have that no one else has, maybe there's an opportunity that we can accomplish that nobody else can accomplish. So what is your purpose? This is a question. What is your purpose in God's story. And when you see that purpose, will you have faith and courage through prayer and fasting and trust in God to step out and do the thing that God has called you to do? Because I am convinced that sometimes we know the thing that God has called us to do, but we do not want to step out because it takes so much faith. So, I mean, read Esther. Now you know when they celebrate Purim. So Purim is where they celebrate, they dress up in costume and do several things, but I don't want to get into that whole feast because I don't understand a lot of it. But I hope you learned something from that. We are streaming on Sunday morning, and we are be at ClarksvilleHighwayChurch.com or GospelChariot.church. Facebook page, Clarksville Highway Church of Christ, or Facebook page, Gospel Chariot, YouTube channel, Gospel Chariot. You can find us online if you want to find us. I know not everybody wants to find us, right? But if you want to find us, you can find us. But if you do not, if you don't have a place to go to church, or if you're part of a church that's not meeting right now and they're not live streaming, you can't watch your own service, we would love to have you join us. We will stream Bible class at 9 o'clock. Jeff Goldtrap is teaching Bible class this week on love, agape. And Jeff Henry will be preaching at 10 o'clock. So if you need a place to be 9 o'clock and 10 o'clock this week to worship God, to listen to a Bible lesson, please join us. Jeff is going to be speaking this week on what makes Christianity different. So this is in the series we're doing, Asking for a Friend. These are questions that you would want to ask, but you might not ask. It's one of those questions where you say, well, I have a friend who, or I have a friend who wondered. That's the kind of question. And we will go, there are 15, well, counting Jeff's, there are 16 of these lessons. They will go through the Sunday before Thanksgiving. So what makes Christianity different is what Jeff is going to be working on. We're also doing a class on Tuesday morning. It is a class on Old Testament chronology. If you go to gospelchariot.church, I think it's on the home page and I think it's on the live stream page. You can go there and register. It's not a really deep class. It's just, it's a Zoom class. Have a lot of interaction, a lot of people talking back and forth. If you want to be a part of that class, just go sign up. You'll get an email that'll have the Zoom link so you can jump on the Zoom link and jump on the Zoom meeting with us. If you don't understand how to use Zoom, okay. Some of us don't either, but we work our way through it. So if you want to sign up for that, go to gospelchariot.church. Think either the home page or if you click on the live stream page, I know it is on the live stream page. So again, hope you will join us on Sunday morning, and hope that you will. We just love to have you part of our family. If you're, if you attend at Clarksville Highway and you feel comfortable coming, obviously we'd love to have you in the auditorium. If you are not comfortable attending yet, and maybe you're high risk, maybe you got a compromised immune system, maybe you're just not comfortable being in a crowd, please join us online Sunday morning. All right, so I'm going to check the chat boxes. Hey, thanks for your comments, Jeff, Courtney, anybody else who's out there and those people out there listening. Please always feel free to put comments in the comment box. And hey, I hope all of you have a great evening and a wonderful rest of the week. And I'll see you soon. But for now,